from my experience, from what I have seen, I have entered homes that are predominantly like very Christian based, and you could just feel the difference.
Hmm.
It's not a scientifically objective, measure of like what is the difference of this environment, but you could just feel it. It's hard to describe without the individual experiencing it themselves. It's almost
Right.
like the idea that somebody has never tasted something salty,
Then you
and
got to
so
describe it
you're
to
trying
them.
to describe it to them. Like they have to first experience some form of it before we
Right.
can even like have a discussion on what it is.
Right. All right, we're back, and lots of things lots of things to talk about today. So, two things that have happened over the course of 2 weeks. One of them is the death of the Pope, Pope Francis. Do we call him Pope Francis? Do we call him Saint Francis? I think
That's a
I think it's.
greit question. I mean,
I'm not
what's the
sure.
difference? I mean, is
Uh,
saint supposed to be something that kind of happens after death?
I think I don't even know. This is what happens when we try to dig about another religion when we haven't really have been exposed to it as much, and it's an interesting thing because the Philippines is a Catholic country, right? We were conquered by Spain for 300 years. We pretty much have Catholicism ingrained in our culture. It's not very well talked about. I remember when the Pope before Pope Francis died. And I remember a lot of people talking about it. There's a lot of chatter about it. There's a lot of social media about it. And then deciding, okay, who gets to be the next pope? I remember it was trending on social media. It is not as trending as it is now. And that's probably because of all the political unrest that is being blown online right now. It just so happens that in the Philippines we're going through a struggle. So it might be all it could it be that, or could it be that it's not as popular? People don't care as much as religion anymore. In fact, why do you think it doesn't matter as much to people anymore? Like for people like you and me, we're not Catholics, although we do share we have a lot of similarities with the Catholic beliefs. Yeah, it doesn't seem to impact us as much or have that much preoccupation in our minds.
Well, I can
To
just
some extent.
say here where I am, it could also just be with the people that we associate with.
Hmm.
So, I mean, it is a big deal around the world for sure, but
Hmm.
it hasn't been to that level of expectations, I guess, from previous passings of the Pope, where I guess
Hmm.
maybe because we were younger, it was more of a curiosity thing, and so maybe we'd
Hmm.
ask around, and people are more than willing to talk about it. But in my case, I mean, now that we're adults, it's like that happened. Okay, that's very interesting. Kudos to El Papa, Pope Francis. But it's like, okay, and what? So that's primarily with, I guess, the Catholics. That now they have to find out how they're gonna decide their next pope. While for the people in my surroundings, it's just oh, that's a milestone that has happened. There's something important that happened, but life goes on, right?
Right.
And for sure, the Catholic Church has made huge impact around the world. You were talking about the Philippines being conquered by Spain, as well as Catholicism being the predominant religion there, and
Right.
it's pretty big here in the U.S. still as well. It's just, I think I agree with what you were saying in that part of it is the technology has brought people closer together, or has access to more people, and with that there's all these clashes of ideas and maybe religion, and it's a little more, I think in some ways in the US we're fatigued, we're a little
Right.
tired, in particular because is this political talk. Donald Trump, had recently just passed his 100 day mark as president,
Right.
and adding more to that maybe divisiveness. There's going to be this idea of the Pope and who the next Pope could be. I think just people in general in social media, from what I have seen, just don't want that extra level of stress. I mean, for sure it's important, but at the same time, in the United States, we're focused on one thing right now, which is the politicals and the
Right.
racism. And just adding religion to it will be a bit more burdensome.
Right. Surely there is a lot of impact that it's going to have with the new pope, and it's going to change some things. So you talk about milestones. One of the interesting things that I heard about, that we talked about, and this is not in the Philippines. This is a friend from Utah. He talks about how there is like a prophecy where you only have a certain number of popes,
Oh,
and
interesting.
this last pope that they're going to elect is going to be this next pope is going to be the last pope ever. And then after him, after he dies, it's going to be like the second coming, and the end of the world supposedly is going to happen. That's an
That's a
interesting
bold
prophecy.
statement.
That is
Very
a
bold.
bold
That's a very
statement.
bold prophecy.
And I
Is
can't
this
believe we haven't talked about it. No one's no
well? Is
it's
this
a
just
huge
hearsay,
milestone.
or is this actually
This is
something that?
this is actually something that they believe in. There is a well, so let me show you. So there is like a church, or there's a place where they put all the pictures of the popes. And they have a certain number of slots. Like they fixed a certain number of
Wow,
slots into it. Okay.
it's like the Mayan
And
calendar.
yeah, yeah. And then they always have space for the new pope. And then it comes so happens that we're in that last slot
Mm,
available. And
I
so
see.
this is where it becomes unclear, where it might just be that someone comes in, and it just so happens that there's like it's the
I'll
last
just
slot available. But
yeah.
maybe it became a thing where people start talking like it's the end of the world. It's hard to confirm, because again, it's you'd have to go deep into religious to the religious history, and a bit into theology as to why they think that.
Mhm.
But thinking about it, it makes you think that there's really something interesting. You'd think it'd be talked about more, even for if it tends to be hearsay, even if it's just the rumors. These rumors tend to fly. People tend to talk
Yes.
about this.
So now that you gave more context to it, I feel like not feel like I think that is one of those hearsays from believers, because you know what? Now they can just make another room with more slots. I think it's one of those things where, you know, people back then, maybe hundreds of years ago, can kind of think about it and do the math and do a bit of prophesying to make it something more grand than it is.
Mm,
Similarly to the Mayan calendar, in which they did not believe 2012 was the end of the world. They simply
right.
ran out of space. They simply believe that like this is enough. We can worry about this later when it comes to that. And in this case, it has come to that.
Imagine the panic that people had where 2020 supposedly would end, and that's the same time that COVID happened. I wonder if that just causes more panic to to everyone else as well, and added to the craziness that we experienced during that time. It was already a crazy enough time, and then you have these people just following conspiracy theory after conspiracy theory, which is whack when you think
Well,
about it.
that kind of makes me think on how, every time everybody thought that the world was going to end, that I do. I'm kind of shifting towards the finance here, but like every time people think that the world's going to end, it's like the perfect time to buy stocks. You kind of bet against everybody's idea that the world is going to end.
Yes,
Uh,
there's
it's just
a
interesting, point there to kind of see where if you can have an iron stomach when everything around you appears to be burning, you would be well fed just a couple years later.
The thing, like, and now trying to connect this, we mentioned, if we mentioned the end of the world, so we had 2012, which was that it's the reason that people thought the world was going to end in 2012 was, for me, I think it's so stupid. It's because this movie came out. You remember that movie called 2012?
Well, it's not that. It's actually the opposite. The movie capitalized on people's ideas that the world is going to end in 2012.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay, so that might have happened in the States. In the Philippines, that was definitely the
that was
idea that
like
we got.
the prophecy. The movie is saying the prophecy of the world.
Yeah, it's saying the prophecy of
I
the
think that's just
world.
great marketing.
That would be so, because then the next thing you'd see is you have all these billboards filled with scripture quotes about preparing for the end of the world. I'm like, are we actually serious about this? We can't we,
Well,
we can't be serious.
I mean, I can kind of see it. If I remember growing up in the Philippines, and in the news, I would always see like hurricane victims, or in the news from what I've seen. And mind you, uh, to put some context, Dragon Ball Z is really big in the Philippines. Before
Yeah.
Dragon Ball Z comes on in the TV, there's like you got to watch the news first. The news comes, and then Dragon Ball Z comes in. So sometimes to make sure I don't miss anything, I'd be like, okay, I'm gonna watch the news, right? And then in the news, it's like, uh, man murdered his family, or
Oh
there's like a
gosh.
hurricane happened, and so much stuff is happening, or
Were you here
so
in the
much.
year 2012? Were you
I
here?
was not. I was not.
Yep.
But there was so much
Okay.
negativity, and I can imagine it's that times 12 over in the Philippines, where everybody is just anticipating the end of the world. Uh,
Right. Then I remember now, like the year 2012 was where that super typhoon Yolanda. It's like one of the biggest typhoons we've had in the Philippines. Which okay, there's always a storm in the Philippines. There's always some sort of typhoon, but this one was a super typhoon. It just devastated people in the Visayas area in Tacloban.
mm-hmm.
And that's when, if you read back to, that's where this company Archipelago 7000, that's where it started to be found. We worked for this company where they built these materials. That's where they got the idea for it.
Mm.
And it's so interesting. We thought the world was ending there. We thought the world was ending in 2020, and I don't think people are taking it as seriously anymore, because it's so many times so everyone has cried wolf with the world's about to end. We just kind of like start to shrug our shoulders, and that's important for per perspective as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, because it was prophesied that the Savior would come when people would least expect it.
Hmm.
And I thought that was just like, oh, we just don't know when he's coming. But
Mm-hmm.
now seeing that people are taking the end of the world kind of less seriously, they're taking morality less seriously, they're taking the concept of religion less seriously. They're least expecting the Savior to come, or just don't believe that there's existence of a God anymore. That's when he would start to appear. And
Well,
there's even it's interesting to see how the world is headed towards that.
yeah, I think that we're still far from that, actually. I mean, I'm speaking here from the U.S. I mean, and I'm not a representative of all the United States, but from what I have seen, I mean, things are getting pricier. And I've just had a talk with this with some friends about, for example, I was just mentioning how, like, one of the benefits, let's say, of somebody who lives in the United States and maybe has ties with another country, particularly the Philippines or Thailand, or some other country that is economically like not as great as the United States. You do
Right.
have that option, especially if you have family there, right? You do have that
Right.
option to simply go back to that country, uh,
Mhm.
and then however many years you worked here in the US is just so much better because you could afford more things there. And I was talking about that with a couple of friends, and I was mentioning that, for example, like let's say 10 years working here in the United States
Right.
is equivalent to, let's say, three times as much as you could be making like in the Philippines. So let's say 10 years working here in the US and saving consistently is almost like working 30 years in the Philippines. And it might,
Right.
rough around. And at that point in time, you could probably retire. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
being in a country that has less economic power. And as I was talking about, a friend kind of mentioned it also, where it's not quite that way because of certain inflations. And something really interesting that was pointed out was an iPhone in the Philippines costs more to buy than buying it in the United States. And
Yeah.
we were just talking about, how maybe there's more depravity in the world, but at the same time, there's actually, in the United States anyway, there's a lot more consumption. In that, I find that there's a lot more complaining happening, and I think it's because we have the time to
Mhm.
complain and put it out there in the social media. And it's not necessarily like a bad thing. Like, we should always improve, but when I compare that to maybe certain living conditions in other places around the world, it's like, we make in the United States, people generally make more, and things in the United States are cheaper than in other places in the world, such as maybe
Mhm.
computer parts, or like, let's say the iPhone. The iPhone, let's say iPhone 17 will come out. Let's say it's $1,000. But then if you're gonna try to buy in the Philippines, it'll be like 1,300, 1,400. So not only the does people in the United States make more, things cost less, uh, and then yet we're still complaining. Yet if you flip that around in another country, you make less and you still have to pay more. It's a bigger sacrifice to get the latest and greatest. It's
Mhm.
just really interesting. And when I see that, it's like, I don't think necessarily the savior is going to be coming, because I guess it's unexpected because things are looking to be more prosperous, or maybe it's just the higher, like maybe like the top few percent of people that are getting those things. But even then, I'm just reminded of myself when I was in Peru, where I never saw anybody with the latest greatest technological items.
Right.
It's always like what they consider latest and greatest, maybe 3 years, 4 years down the line, and it's like, it's a great thing, it's a great phone. But then here in the US, maybe or maybe in just the West in general, maybe we're spoiled with tech gurus kind of showing us what we want, and what we could have. It could just be that level of perception. But
Not not to
you go,
mention the service that you get for it. Like if your iPhone breaks in the US, you could easily get repaired, and it's usually they
oh yeah,
replace it for free.
I mean,
Here
like
we do not
warranties, the
have
idea of a warranty, and it's expected in the US, but then everywhere around the world, like, we kind of just, that's kind of rare. You're talking about like the warranties, and it's just really interesting how people's perspectives can change so much
right.
if they've been in a really privileged position for so long. Um, but like, to go back to like what you were mentioning with the savior coming down, I don't think it's gonna be coming anytime soon. But maybe because I said it, I'm not expecting it at all. Like,
I mean,
I just
no
feel
one
like
really knows.
I just feel like there's depravity because of like really living poor conditions, like
Hmm.
literal, like, objectively poor conditions. But then there's, I think, a level of depravity because something is prospering so well. I can see it where virtual reality has reached a point where it's so good, or like AI, there's the idea of this AI girlfriend, AI boyfriend, that
Right.
people no longer want to connect with one another when they have Chat GPT who knows them so well. Or like, the virtual world is so much better than the real world per se. Maybe the virtual world of France looks cleaner, better. You can see the best parts of France without ever setting foot there, and then people will be content with that. I can see that level of depravity, like both sides going both ways, and I think at that point is when we need somebody to better ground us again to our purpose here as children of God.
I think it's interesting how you mention the change of the world when it comes to AI. There's there's definitely signs And I think it's important to notice the things of a changing world. We've become less really. I don't think it's hard to prove why religion is important. Like, and I'm not
I
gonna
think it
go with
is.
my belief. Like,
I think it's very easy. I think
it,
it's very
yeah,
easy. I
yeah.
think like
No.
mhm.
Okay, there's the things you teach of religion, the things you teach of a belief in a higher being, but then there's also like needing religion per se. I think
Mhm.
there's more and more people that would say that there's less and less of a need for it, and that's because they would say that it doesn't add much there. It adds more to the division than the unity of a people. But like, what? Okay, what's your thoughts on it? Like, I think that seems to be, even though we believe that religion is important, it seems to me that the world is going there anyway, because you see less and less people believing in the need for it. And so, if it was so important, then how come humanity has not naturally drifted towards more people believing in a god or a higher being or a higher power?
I just think that there's a distinction, right? Like when you mean religion, do you also include spirituality with it? Because is there's a distinction between the two? Like one is, I guess, more institutionalized, and one is like more individualized.
Hmm.
Uh, but it's almost, I think at this point in time, more people are becoming actually like are finding more information with religion rather than kind of falling off. And I think in the US anyways, the younger generation are kind of having that rather than the opposite because of the ease of not believing. I think also normal people can go out and kind of see the benefits of having certain principles be embedded in their life. Like the idea that your body is a temple, and so you maybe like that principle would then have you with belief change the way maybe you what you would eat, how you would treat your body, uh, and then it's a shift in the mindset of like who on how you should be moving this body of yours. While if somebody that doesn't necessarily have that belief, like they could still be healthy, but it's almost like it's not actively trying to be healthy in the bestest of ways. But you
Mm.
were mentioning, it's like why do I think that, like, is the assumption there that more people are becoming atheistic, or
I think, like, I would think so, that there's more people who are drawing farther away
oh, I
from it,
actually think
and
it's
then
I think
there
the reason why is because of more conflict on the many reasons why there's uh, religious conflict.
right.
I mean, the two predominant religions are Christianity and uh, Muslim, and then there's Hinduism. And I think it's like, let's say if you have those three, which constitutes, let's say, almost 7 billion people, like the vast majority of people,
Hmm.
it makes a lot of the people that are not part of that kind of look down on them. And then, so there's people that lose faith maybe in Hinduism, and then they kind of fall into atheism. But I think more often than not, what happens is actually they lose faith in one thing or the other, and then eventually they kind of get back into it after a couple of years.
Interesting.
I mean, that's just how I'm seeing it, but obviously we'll see how it works in the future. And I just feel like, from my experience, from what I have seen, I have entered homes that are predominantly like very Christian based, and you could just feel the difference.
Hmm.
It's not a scientifically objective measure of like what is the difference of this environment, but you could just feel it. It's hard to describe without the individual experiencing it themselves. It's almost like the idea that somebody has never tasted something salty,
Then you
and
got to
so
describe it
you're
to
trying
them.
to describe it to them. Like they have to first experience some form of it before we
Right.
can even like have a discussion on what it is.
Right. And so, well, it's interesting you put it that way because, I kind of differ in approach. I think more people say they believe in religion and that it is important, but not many people live it. I mean, you see it, you see it in a world of falling standards with differing beliefs. You see it in people where they they're first of all the idea of a god and the idea that of morality, the idea that they would rather choose to do what they feel is right or what they want to them. It's easy to associate yourself with a religion when the religion already aligns with your beliefs and the way that you're living your life. But then how come is it that we feel like we live in a world where everything is getting worse? And I would argue, I think the reason it's getting worse is because we've pretty much taken for granted the things that were important. We don't take it as seriously. We don't take it as we don't it used to be like, your religion, you take religion so seriously that it becomes a sin. It's like an unspoken law or an unwritten law that if you break it, you feel like everyone's punishing you, like just the way that people are looking at, like punishing you, like you're somehow condemned from that community. It's definitely doesn't feel like it's the same situation. I would say that with the people that I mingle with, I know people a lot who say that they are spiritual and believe in religion, and yet their actions and the way that they live their life definitely do not align with what their spiritual principles are.
That's very interesting you say that, because I feel like everybody has their own, like everybody has a different timeline, right?
Hmm.
It's as if you were to judge Saul before he
Hmm.
became Paul, like you would look at him and be like, well, who are you to do these things? Like a Christian would look at Saul as if he's the worst person in the world, yet
Right.
somehow kind of God chose him still. I think this is why in this case, like you were mentioning, it's like maybe they're not following certain principles. That's between those individuals and God. And it's like you can see why you can see that them maybe not following certain principles, and you should not necessarily expect karma to hit them, because
Mm,
that's thankfully it's not for you to decide.
right.
Thankfully, like this is where you got to focus on your own thing first, before righteously judging somebody else.
Right.
Um, and so with that, it's like, okay, yes, it's difficult. And I think there's also the difference between people maybe falling away from a certain belief because of the people that supposedly believes that thing, and or maybe or because of the actual principles of that religion. I think, for example, in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, there's a lot of people that fall away because of the way they were treated by the people of that religion.
Hmm.
But that's not necessarily the religion itself. It's not the principles of those religions, of that religion. And so you got to attack the principle, the principality of that religion, and you got to not attack it. You got to direct those grievances with that principality of that religion, rather than the way other people are maybe interpreting something else. And I think an
Right.
example of this would be how like caffeine or Coke or Dr. Pepper, for example, right?
Yeah.
Are
Teaches
you
a moral
are you
lesson while
allowed
drinking
to
Dr. Pepper.
kind of drink it? Like, is that part of the word of wisdom?
Right.
I mean, I was kind of taught something else, but I can understand why somebody can, maybe include that. I
Right.
personally don't, and I mean, this is just for me, but like, I don't see that as something necessarily. It's almost like a personal choice kind of thing. It's
Right.
not as black and white as people would try to make it out to be. And maybe somebody can also say like, oh, your body's a temple, so you shouldn't maybe put
You
something
shouldn't like, yeah.
soda. But like, I'm not making excuses, but yeah, we could always treat our bodies better. We could always do things better mentally, physically, spiritually. And this is just that's where it becomes like a individual road, uh, communication between you and God. So I mean, the principles are there, and in the long run, in an eternal timeline, I think
Hmm.
the consequences of that is really important. But in this um, finite world, maybe some people won't experience the negativity of certain decisions until much later, and then in a timeline of an eternity, I can see that maybe as they'll be enjoying whatever vices they could have for millions of billions of years, but then once again in an eternal timeline, and that's a long time.
Right.
uh like in the end, there's that level of misery of eventually knowing what could be but hasn't happened because of that is your habits at that point.
It's interesting when you mention how people would see religion differently, and how they would act. Like, you could be of the same religion and you could have different beliefs, and you could also be an active or not much of an active member depending on the circumstances, right? When you were describing all of that, I actually start to think about the perception on marriage. One of the things that is going to be interesting when you do one of the things I think about when I look for a potential partner is I try to think about how would my religious and spiritual beliefs interact with another individual's, because it's a critical factor, especially if both of us wants to have kids, and then we both have to have this talk about how we're going to be able to raise them up. How are we going, what are the values that we're going to teach them? And people might not see it as a problem, like, oh, it's great, like, we think drinking and smoking is bad, okay, don't do that. Okay, great if you can get along with those, but it's the ones that you don't not necessarily agree on. For example, how you should dress, the kind of things that you partake in your body, of, like, so with for me, I don't have a problem with caffeinated carbonated drinks such as Dr. Pepper and Coke, because I don't even like soft drinks. I don't know how
Well,
people
it's
do this.
convenient for you.
Yeah, it's very convenient, right? Like, I don't even, it doesn't bother me because it doesn't matter. But then it's a different thing when you talk about, there's a portion in the Doctrine and Covenants that talks about the word of wisdom, that says anything that is harmful, and so that should include junk food, fast food, all of those stuff. You should have a little bit of meat and definitely more fruits and vegetables. Like, you use that against me, and I'm definitely guilty of that. And so, how are we going to be able to teach those principles in a growing household? It's interesting for me, like, to see how other couples are able to work it out.
Hmm.
They have different beliefs as to how things should be, and yet how are they able to grow spiritually together? Like, it baffles me. It used to be a thing. I didn't realize it until my divorce, that I realized it's one of those things that you will definitely end up arguing about. That if it's not, you don't necessarily have to agree 100% with the person, but you need to be able to find a way to live in harmony despite having different perspectives and views of how religion plays a role in your lives, and how much time and effort and dedication you're going to give towards it. I never thought I'd have to decide on a partner based on their religious perspective and aspects in life. And now it's becoming a quite a serious thing. Whenever I look at someone, I think, okay, how would my religion and my beliefs, my perspectives as well, and how seriously I view things of the church, how would that affect this individual? How would that affect their marriage? And in turn, how would that affect how we raise our children together? Because yeah, we definitely want to have a home where there's some sort of religious foundation,
Mm-hmm.
but what kind of foundation is that? Like, how cemented is it? You
Mm-hmm.
know, how are we going to live that?
Well, I also feel like that's such a huge burden that you were mentioning, right? Maybe
Right.
potentially becoming a parent. But I also think that as you were mentioning, it kind of made me think about, parents aren't perfect. Uh,
Right.
as people, we're not perfect. And then maybe that child, like in some ways, we always expect the child to have the best parents. And then like they should have, they're a clean slate so that they have the perfect upbringing, but that's not the
Mhm.
case because of the imperfection of people. But at the
Right.
same time, that is not an excuse for the child once they grow up to then use that as a crutch to be like, well, I was, maybe my parents maybe didn't give me a toy, so now I can be this rebellious
Oh
person, right? Like,
gosh.
I can be antisocial. It's like, no, like there's a level of accountability there for both the parents and the child. But I think, yeah, I think the parent in a way should be thinking about how they can best be the parent, while the child, at a certain perspective, will have to think best on how they can best be a child. Uh, and so with that combination, like both the parents and child, grows to be the best they can be with those imperfections. And then the crutch of it all, I think, is going to be about forgiveness, because they're not going to be perfect. The child could do something absolutely stupid that could potentially get the parents in trouble, but there's that
Right.
level of forgiveness and understanding on where the child's coming from. At the same time, the child, maybe not at that moment, can better understand why their parents aren't giving them everything that they wanted, why
Mhm.
maybe the parents aren't there all the time, maybe because they're at work or XYZ, or maybe they could kind of see why the father is a drunk. Like there's eventually a couple of years where the child becomes an adult themselves, and then having to look back and self-reflect on the difficulties of life, and being able to see, maybe not agree with those decisions, but they can understand it, and hopefully they can eventually reach the point of forgiveness. Because I think that that trauma that they have experienced, which is very much valid, is going to be a chain to them unless they are able to cut those chains off through the power of forgiveness. And
Right.
this could take years, and they could actually be, they can still be successful. They don't necessarily have to address it. But I think in a timeline of an eternity, it it's one of those things that has to be addressed, and hopefully they'll learn in this life early on, so then they don't. It's much harder to kind of change who you are once you have a perfect body in the next life. And so I just think like it's important to just do your best is really the point. Do your best in whatever case that you're in, because and this includes like those mistakes that people will naturally make, or other people's choices make, that will affect you in a negative way. And it sounds, I think, sometimes kind of preposterous, like when I was a lot younger, like the idea of that. But in a timeline of an eternity, like just imagine holding on to many, many grudges against many, many people.
Mhm.
It's more negative to you than those other people. And were you able to give the BYU speeches a shot to like kind of listen to?
Which one are
Oh
you
yeah, yeah,
referring
the,
to?
the being 100%
Which
responsible,
one? Yes, yes, I've read that.
and
Yeah.
but in particular the idea of the abuser and the abused.
Right.
I especially like that example because it's something that I think in our cores we kind of want justice against the abuser, and we definitely should. But at the same time, the abused needs to forgive the abuser, else they are chained from what has happened in the past. And even
Mhm.
so much so that maybe then they can pray for them that they may change their ways so that they may no longer be chained as well. And I think it's just really powerful, and it's very almost too mature, like almost too Christ-like, like to really reach to that depth. But it's very much possible, as we've seen. Um, but yeah, I mean, we've been going on about this particular topic for a bit, but
Yeah.
um, do you have anything else to add regarding this?
I think for me it's very important to, well, like you said, I think the best that we can do is simply the best at the moment. As I think about it a lot. I think about what kind of father I would be, and it goes back to really thinking about how we were abandoned by our father as well. And I frequently think about what should I do so that I could be better. The interesting thing about kids is that they will definitely use your mistakes as a reason for their failures. And it's interesting how how a lot of kids grow up psychologically. They always point out to how how things were in the household. And so you kind of have to be like this perfect being in order to not be blamed for any of your kids' mistakes, which is definitely hard to do. My hope and prayer is that, if I do find someone, if I do find a partner who I could build a family with, and I do have kids of my own, I would only hope that, they would be understanding of my flaws and my weaknesses, and that they would see that I'm a person who is simply trying. It will probably take a year. It would probably take them to have their own kids before they understand what it's like to be a parent. It might take that long. But I'm hoping that they would be able to look at the things that I did right and forgive me for my shortcomings, and hopefully reach their full potential. And I look forward to seeing them become better people than I am. I know that certainly I'm trying to become better than my parents. That's really the things that we should do. I'm grateful if my mother, who raised me single handedly, if she wasn't able to teach me everything, the very least she was able to teach me where to turn to whenever I need help, to be accountable and take responsibility for my actions, and to learn to think critically, to be empathetic, but at the same time to see how the world is, that we do live in a fallen world, and how to try and live it, because there's just not a straightforward answer to everything. I could have turned out very, very differently. Kids who are raised by single mothers, statistically do not fare out well. I'm just grateful that I don't have to end up like that, and that even though I'm making some of the same mistakes that my father did, I can find assurance that I don't have to repeat what he did and abandon my own kids and somehow be a part of their lives when I do have them, because I know that that's going to, I know how it feels. I know how painful it is. I'd like to spare my children that, that pain, and basically hope for the best.
Yeah, I feel like parenthood is almost like a pendulum, where generally speaking, most parents try to um, avoid the same mistakes that their parents have made, but then they kind of switch back and forth, almost like a parent that allows their kid to do whatever they want because
Right.
their parent was really strict, and because that parent before was really strict. Like so, then because the people that they knew that had whatever, like they could do whatever, chose to do wrong things. So I think there's always this pendulum of people trying to do their best to raise their children correctly.
Right.
But primarily speaking, like everybody, I am a strong believer that generally speaking, at the age of 8, most people like have this ability to really think for themselves. Maybe it's not apparent at that very moment, but there is a level of accountability there that
All
stems
right.
from, as a general rule, around the age of 8. But I also, one of the best things that a parent can do is to first and foremost be more financially stable. And speaking of which, recently, one of the stars of the investment world,
Yeah.
recently, um, is he already under retirement, or?
He announced that he's going to retire as being the CEO of Berkshire Hathaway. He's officially retiring by the end of this year,
Oh wow, okay. By the end of
and
the year.
that is an interesting story. You know, some of the greatest. Uh, any talk to any investor that I know. Talk to any investor that you know. Every one of them acknowledges that Warren Buffett is one of the greatest. I've there's some people who there's some great investors where you kind of say, "Oh, I don't really believe him because this and that," or "Yeah, I believe some of it." But every investor that I know gives credit to this man. This man has lived up to staying financially strong, is a believer of the market, gives the most credible advice anyone will ever have. Everyone acknowledges that his advice is important. Everyone has advises you to start doing what he does, to read what he shares, because there is relevance in what he does. And it's surprising to see that he's retiring. I mean, like people knew that he was going to retire at some point, um, but to hear that it's finally here, that day has finally come, is kind of a realization that there's going to be changes. I'm realizing that I'm old. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm getting older, and that the times are definitely changing. Like, what was your initial reaction to hearing the news about this?
I mean, to be honest, I had a very neutral reaction to it. And obviously, he has made great contributions to what constitutes as great investing. But I'm gonna be playing a little bit of a devil's advocate here because
All
you've
right.
glazed him enough. I think Warren Buffett is one of the best, but at the same time, we got to acknowledge that he also has made some mistakes, such as regarding Bitcoin or any of these cryptocurrencies.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, there is that idea that he mentioned that don't ever invest in anything you don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe how I see it is, sure, you didn't understand it, but as a finance guy, shouldn't you put in more effort to understand it? The idea and the values of what cryptocurrency can do.
Yeah.
And primarily, I think recently, where although he held up a lot of cash, I mean, he hasn't, from my awareness, he hasn't really put the money down at the moment. And recently, with this quarter ending, uh, a lot of tech companies pushed the stocks up again. So I was under the assumption that this was the time that Warren Buffett was planning on. They held
Mm-hmm.
a lot of cash, and now that everything's crashing, now they can kind of just buy throughout the dip. But
Mm-hmm.
from what I've seen, I don't think they have yet bought, but I could be wrong. If that was the case, then I think they must have bought in the correct time, or they're potentially just still holding on to a lot of cash. And I think at this point in time, maybe because I'm older and I've actually acknowledged, I've read on these topics. Maybe like there's a point in time where I feel like there's a lot of information out there now that you don't have to necessarily buy into Warren Buffett's idea. I
Mm-hmm.
think I spoke to you about this earlier, where in terms of finance and certain consistent good advice, the advice like it's like the same meat but with a different sauce. Yeah, simply, Like there's some really basic principles out there, and everything else is just maybe salt and pepper to the meal. And so even with Warren Buffett's passing, I don't think that Berkshire Hathaway has anything necessarily to worry about. I mean, he's had 60 plus years to
Right.
kind of shape the culture of that company, as well as uh, maybe mentor the next people in line to do some solid trades.
Right.
Um, and I mean, if anything, he just says, I think it's the idea of time in the market beats timing the market. And for some reason, how I see it is just Warren Buffett was kind of timing the market in his last couple of years. But I mean, everybody makes mistakes. We were just talking about it, but that doesn't necessarily take away anything from what he's done in the investment world.
Right. I mean, to think that he's made so much contributions, his advice is definitely, well, I don't know if if he is the originator of the advice of investing long, like time in the market, because I think that everyone is definitely saying that. There's really, it's really hard for me to prove whether he's the one who. I think he just made the saying popular to invest long term in the market.
So he didn't
The
write
thing,
the book; he just ended it.
yes, that kind of scenario, like, and but for me the reason I look up to him is the reason I find this very, very influential in my life is because uh well, they were the ones who basically established like these rules, and a lot of people really draw back and refer back to him. Again, I don't know if he's the originator of it. He could be he's the one who made it so popular during the times of financial crisis. He was one of those people who really made it through. He made it through. He made it through the dot-com bubble. He made it through the crisis of '08. I'm not sure if he was alive during the time of the Great Depression, but it was just something that he was so dedicated to in his life, so dedicated to in his lifetime. It was just him and Charlie Munger, these two buddies, doing it
He
and
was
writing
alive
it out
during that
together.
time. He is
Yeah,
94 years old. He was.
he
He's
was alive.
94. So
Wow. And so there's that, whenever to stabilize the market, there's definitely going to be some sense that Warren Buffett established these principles of how we could stabilize the market. You don't time the market, you spend more time in it, you invest long term, you let your money compound. The thing, I think, the most influential one for me, one of the most influential quote is, he says something along the lines of, if you lose money for the company, if you lose money of the company, then all can be forgiven. We accept that there are mistakes made. However, if you lose a shred of reputation, then all the wrath of the company is going against you. Somewhere along those lines, and that's so important to me because for me, like, I at some point I want to be able to start my own fund. I want to be able to do what he does and invest for other people's. I want to provide these opportunities for those who are not able to or do not have the time simply for themselves. And that is so important because you can always make back the money that you've lost. You rarely can make back the reputation that is stained. And that for me is very powerful. It's something that I try to live by. That's why I try to live a more honest life. It's going to hurt you guys. I'm going to say something that might hurt you guys. It's going to be my honest opinion, but I'd rather be someone who is seen as honest and upfront rather than someone who just kind of shapes their opinions towards yours. So sorry, that's just kind of kind of the person that I am. All right, so for you, taking away that devil's advocate for a moment, or if you want to continue with that phase, like, what do you think was the most influential quote that you've seen that like kind of stuck with you?
I think that's a great question. So, I mean, I feel like all the other financial gurus out there that I've kind of listened to, they've all taken something from Warren Buffett, and there's not one thing that necessarily comes in mind. I think the principles that I've kind of held on regarding the investments have been popularized by him, and so there's not one particular quote that really comes in mind from his many talks about this. And so, I mean, it's just, I think the idea that, I think primarily it's going to be to invest with the market. I think that idea that you're so special that you can beat the market, more often than not, that is not going to be the case. And so there is no shame at all in just being the market rather than trying to beat it. And so, with that philosophy in mind, I mean, it's very easy to kind of follow that investment strategy, and also having your expectations set. I think that idea of really anything above, let's say, 12, 15% is a bit more risky in a general sense. And so, you should just expect the market rate for most everything. And there's no shame in that, because there's an accumulation of growth after a certain period of time.
All right. Yeah, it's fascinating to think that he's the one who created it all of these principles. He's not a lot of people follow his advice. I remember an interview where he was doing, and he was asked, why do you think not a lot of people follow your advice? Because his strategy is to invest long term in the market, not focus on beating it, just being the market, to not to time it, but to just spend a long time in the market. He was asked, why do you think that a lot of people don't follow those principles that you teach? And his response is because, like, no one wants to wait that long. As human beings, we tend to be programmed to want that immediate gratification, and especially in the world that we live in right now, where everything's instant, we kind of want things to happen right now. I know that I've definitely been guilty about it. If I look at the times where I made so much mistakes in investing, was because I could link that back to trying to rush things, trying to immediately get the reward.
Yeah. And I
And
think,
now,
yeah, I think part of it also is there's so many people saying so many different things. Part of what Warren Buffett has done is that you can see his record. And a lot of people out there, this, maybe they could say certain parts of his principles, but then they kind of don't use it in the appropriate context. Um, like, I mean, I think he started investing at the age of 12 or something along those lines, where he's had more than a couple years to really see how everything has grown. I mean, and it did take him a while to become a millionaire. So there's
right.
that. And I think there's a lot of people that kind of just see the end result and kind of want to do that. But what took him to be even in that end result is a little bit different from the beginning. And I think I'm reminded of what Charlie Munger was saying with, there's no shame in being part of the market, but if you want to beat the market, you actually do have to do something different, right? And that requires a little bit more risk, a higher risk tolerance. And in this idea that there's a survivorship bias, there are people that go against certain principles, but they still win. But it's not the general way for the vast majority of people. For every maybe one winner that did something really strange, like a certain put in a crazy stock, there's like 99 other losers. So we got to kind of put everything in perspective, and why are they saying those things? What courses they're selling?
Right.
Just trying not to get scammed.
Look at the age that when he became a millionaire. He became a millionaire at the age of 32, and a billionaire by the age of 55. And then there's even the side note here: 99% Buffett's net worth was achieved after 50 years old. To think that he was willing to play the long term. Can you imagine the dedication that you should have, the patience, like
Well, I think we
the
also we shouldn't necessarily glaze that, because some people, like, it just depends on your goals.
right. Okay.
Why, like, I also understand where maybe some people, there's that idea of YOLO, where you only live once, and so, like, why would you wait maybe for 50 years, until you're the age of 50 before you can travel, to France, or travel to the Philippines or somewhere.
Right.
And that is like a long time to wait and maybe just work, eat, and like that's so monotonous. So you got to do things that are within your what is considered like happiness for you. And I think there's going to be an order of operations to that,
Right.
um, if people have
I
the
mean,
discipline.
I get that part. I understand why people would want to wait, but like the thing that what fascinates me is that he was doing this. He was doing this in his 20s, and he did it until his 90s. Imagine the joy that he found in trying to do something. Like, how many people do you know can proudly say that their work is something that they're very, very proud of, that they're willing to do it for such a long period of time? They're able to give it so much focus, and that just gives them so much joy that waiting and being patient doesn't hurt as much. Imagine the passion, the love you have for doing something like that. Not a lot of people can confidently say that I found something that I feel like I can do for the rest of my life. It's just like one of those top 3 things I just want to be doing constantly.
Oh, that kind of reminded me of one of the things that I admired about Warren Buffett was he recognizes his strengths and weaknesses. He recognizes that his skill set of being able to analyze is valuable in the marketplace, and that's what made him wealthier than most people. But he also kind of sees himself as a human being. He's not better than somebody else, because, for example, if he's in an island, right, people have to do more physical labor, to get by. He's
Mm,
gonna be in the bottom of the rung uh, of that society. He was humble in that, in his explanation on it, was how his skill sets is awarded with certain levels of wealth, but in a different society, a different time, maybe his skill sets was going to make him just like not as wealthy at all, or maybe not as productive in terms of the system that he lived in. So there is that level of humility that I can appreciate with Warren Buffett, and I think that also kind of helps go on with what we were talking about with to me, it's like the worth of life, the worth of a being. And so there's that level of humility that we also need to kind of take into consideration when we speak about wealth, or certain finances, because maybe in a post-apocalyptic, after World War III, there's that quote.
yeah.
I don't know what World War III would be. What kind of weapons, what kind of things people will be using in World War III, but World War IV would be, people will be using sticks and stones. And so it's that idea, right? Like maybe in another timeline, like certain ideas, certain systems, we wouldn't even be having this ability to communicate like this, or just as a whole, we're actually living in a more peaceful time.
Mhm.
As saying that while there's the Ukraine war happening, there's horrific things, tragedies still happening around the world. But as a general whole, I think people, with everything being sensationalized, like, we're living in a better time now that is more peaceful. But I think I think in a way it's good, because people are being enraged with what is happening in certain injustices, and we should be. And so I'm hoping that the generic like people generally will be good to one another. In the end, that we're gonna have a system that actually would benefit those that are being good in something like that. Being good, not nice, is gonna actually be rewarding.
Yes. I mean, I can't agree more. We've just evolved as a society, and it takes a little perspective to see that. Oh, I'm curious of your take on this. I want to ask you because we talk about long-term markets, we talk about stability in the economy, and how that can make everyone a winner. Now, one of the things that I'm trying to do is bring a fund into the Philippines and convince them to invest. And one of the terms that I have is that one of the terms that I will have is you can't withdraw your money for 5 years because that
Mhm.
prevents you
The
from
treasury,
panic selling. Yeah,
like a
that
treasury.
prevents you. Yeah, like a treasury. It prevents you from like getting out. Like it
Hmm.
prevents you from selling low.
Yeah,
And
and
I
buying
wouldn't
back.
want I wouldn't want to be forced to sell low because that's kind of a stain on my reputation. But for Filipinos, they're kind of sensitive of how long their money is going to be locked up. And it's never a guarantee, right? Like even though the S&P 500 and the Nasdaq and the Dow Jones and Russell 2000, the index ETFs tend to be pretty secure, right? As a financial analyst, we always have to say there is always a risk of you losing money instead of gaining money. And so I always have to say that. So, how would you convince Filipinos? How would you convince people who are definitely scared of losing money? How would you convince them
Yeah, so I think this is
to
a
invest?
marketing issue,
Right.
and from the dawn of time, the best
Mm-hmm.
marketing is a story. The story, and
Mm-hmm.
whenever when you're talking about this, I'm thinking of a seed being planted and how it can grow, and how the first few years does not look appealing. It almost looks like
Right.
the investment has been worthless, but once you can recognize, like a couple of years that it's been growing, even then it's still kind of it's impressive, but there's nothing happening. But it was only until it bears fruit that you can, like, what your one seed became has 1000x, you know, and it
Mm-hmm.
only takes time, and it takes the nutrition and watering and a gardener to kind of make sure that it happens, that the gardener shows the right patch of soil and looking around if there's any particular dangers, and protecting that plant to in its initial stages, that it's gonna grow well. And so I think it's a story problem. I think it's not an analytical problem. It's not a
Mm-hmm.
math problem. It's a marketing issue. And I'm kind of reminded of this. I don't remember which class it was, but it was the idea that there were these researchers that went over to Africa, and I mean these farmers were maybe, like, in dollar form, they were only maybe making $2 to $5, let's say, every month. So imagine that, like, every day, how much they'll be able to make. And then
Mm-hmm.
these researchers are like, here's some money, this is what you should do this, and you will be wealthy. It's like this is the sketch, this is the graphs, do this, you're gonna be wealthy. you
Right.
you will never have to work again, like, really, do this. And like, I mean, they were able to just give these guys money. And then after a while, after a couple years, and just, like, researching and looking at what these farmers are doing, it turns out more or less what they've done is that money that they should have done, like, in terms of certain investments, they just used it, and it never really became an investment. And it's part of it is because their mindset is different. And you shouldn't, like, I don't fault them for it. No, nobody faults them. They're living in a situation where they don't think about an investment because they don't really see another using that seed to grow somewhere else and growing, because they're thinking that they could die tomorrow in a way, like starvation or
Mhm.
something of that nature. How I kind of relate to that is there are certain needs that they have. They don't have the certain basic needs of the ability to think next week. They only have the ability to think of today, or even at most tomorrow. And so
Mhm.
having that longer mindset, and it takes somebody, maybe like you have to give them the reins. And in this case, and we were mentioning about a fund, it makes a lot of sense. And I'm kind of reminded also of like the movie The Big Short, where you know a particular banker or analyst or a fund manager,
Yeah.
he's like, everybody wanted to sell at the bottom, and he's like, nope, I have close your accounts. You guys do not have permission to do this, and everybody is getting frustrated with him.
Yeah.
And he kind of rode down the lows, and it went sky high, and then he was able to sell. And the story was like, oh, he's like a genius, but like in the real world, the
Mhm.
investors got mad at him because he could have gone even more, like, so they can never be happy. But I think as long as, like you were mentioning, reputation, there are certain expectations and there's no guarantees. But the best thing that you can tell as that person in that position is your reputation, that for sure you're going to do the best thing you can do, like in their interest. And that's the best thing that you can hope for. I mean,
Mhm.
in some ways, you're providing time, energy, and experience, expertise on a particular topic that seems daunting for most people. Looking at certain details, and as long as you can explain that in a story, I think it should work out.
I'm reminded of this when you were saying that. It was like I'm seeing people when they're afraid to invest because they're afraid to lose money, and they're hoping to get the most out of it. I'm comforted in a sense that at least the best thing I can do is present transparency and present a good reputation to these people. They could do this on their own, pretty much. But
I mean,
like
there,
the thing,
there's
like I'm.
yeah, there is that idea, like you were mentioning. Like anybody can, at this point in time, I think YouTube has been a great resource. Anybody can do a DIY in everything. You know what? If you have a car and there's a problem, you can, generally speaking, DIY it. Like do it yourself. You have maybe even something, maybe roof shingles. You can probably do it yourself. But do you want to go through that time, energy, and effort to fix those things yourselves and potentially mess up, which doing it twice is sometimes like is even worse than just doing it right the first time. And so there is that risk. So there's the level of convenience, and how I always kind of say is like the convenience fee. There's a convenience fee for an expert to help you with what they're helping you with. And if you're not willing to pay a certain price for it, no biggie. That is the risk you're gonna incur if something bad happens. And if you're able to do it perfectly, what I've seen, maybe certain things in YouTube, they watch a YouTube video, they do it perfectly, good for them. But I think the vast majority of people, if they really attempt it, they could also do a decent enough job that it's okay. But there's also that probability that they've done a bad job, that it actually made the situation worse, where it could have been cheaper to just have paid it right the first time.
Right. And so I really have to focus more on just just reputation wise. I think that's the best that I can do is say that I'll do the best that I can. You're more than welcome to try, but I guess it's a matter of marketing to the right kinds of people. I should be. I Hearing this makes it sound like I should focus less on making my product an ideal product or service to all kinds of people, and instead make it an ideal product or service to a certain group of people.
Of
And
course.
thinking about that, I saw this. I wonder if you saw this meme. I saw this. And I can't tell you how real this is. Yeah, like, it's like the difference between a $500 client and a $50,000 client. The $500 client is like, I feel like with this investment I'm about to making you, our lives are about to change. I need you to promise me that you're going to bring the results. I'm entrusting you with our livelihood and lives. Like, it's very dramatic and saying like, please don't screw this up. I feel like something bad is going to happen if this does go wrong. And then the higher paying client is like, here's the money. Take care of it. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, both are valid, right? Both are very
Right.
valid. So you kind of seeing the difference between the two kind of reminded me of this short that I saw in Facebook, where there is a server who's fantastic with the clients, with the I guess yeah, with the clients, with the people buying there in that restaurant, and then the manager's like, "Hey, you've been great. Everybody says that you're doing a great job, but like, I just realized that like, but we keep telling you to always let them know about certain products, like let's say upsell them, kind of,
Mm,
about certain products that that they could have." And then
right.
she was like, "Oh, I can't do that." And then the manager kind of showed another waiter, explaining like waiter B, please explain to waiter A why she should do that. And really, the result of it was waiter B was telling to waiter A, like, I just like you were born in a poor family, weren't you? And then
Wait,
the waiter,
really?
yeah, the waiter A is saying like, yeah, like that's why I don't really want to upsell them. It's like, well, like and the waiter B would say, well, we want to upsell. Like, it's not really upsell. I don't want to misconstrue that idea. Like we're talking about better experiences because because it is a better experience. It is maybe like a better food quality. It's just better for them if they can afford it. I do not already assume that they cannot afford it. And that's the
Mm.
issue with waiter A. And then waiter A is like, okay, thanks. Like, and how do you know all these things? And then waiter B said, I was born in a rich family. And so there's a different level of mindset there. And both are valid, but I think living in the real world and then seeing the world as how it is, I think, yeah, we got to shed some of those lies that we've seen. Like, we shouldn't necessarily have that idea that everybody's experiences are like ours. And this is why putting yourself out there, like upselling, let's say,
Hmm.
um, is it evil? It's not like a negative thing. It's also just a question, right? It's also a
Hmm.
question that can a question a real question means that they can have multiple answers. In this case, the answer can be yes or no or everything in between.
I'm grateful that you bring that up because if I had to choose what kind of client I would like to be, I'd like to be the $50,000 client. That's something that I'm not there quite yet. Actually, if I think about it, I'm not close to there. I'm not close to there at all. But your mindset just changes when you have a little more capital that you're willing to risk. Whoever said money can't buy happiness was probably a poor person. And the reason I say that is because it's like the context that it was, or he's probably a rich person who meant something differently by it. But the thing
I
is, like, when you have more money to spend, you're able to worry less, and you're able to you're able to see things more in a certain perspective, like the path that you've had to tread just to be able to get to where you are to become that $50,000 client. It's not an easy uphill battle, and you probably have gained more perspective and more appreciation for things as you've done so.
well, I think just to kind of go back into that, I think it is really important to define what that word happiness means,
Right.
because depending on that definition, I would wholeheartedly agree or wholeheartedly disagree. But assuming that it is the perspective that it's going to give you comfortability, 1000%. Obviously, with more resources, you will be a lot more comfortable. And at
Right.
that level of comfortability, that is when you can then think about the bigger problem, the privilege problem, such as what is the meaning, like why am I here? Let's say, rather than certain problems like what am I gonna eat today or tomorrow. I mean, it's just like that farming example.
Yeah.
I'm grateful. I'm privileged to be in this country that I don't have to necessarily like straight up worry about what am I eating tonight or tomorrow. Um, if you are in that situation, you don't think about investments. You don't think about years down the line. You don't have
Mhm.
time. You don't have that privilege to worry about that because you're
Right.
you're you're so focused on the now to just survive.
Right. There's definitely different kinds of problems. My aspirations. I remember someone asking me, um, this is I feel stupid because I remember someone asking me like, why do you want to become rich? Because the assumption was when we were meeting this mentor of ours, the assumption was that everyone wanted to become rich, and I gave like a super stupid bland answer like I want to change the world. Not that it's a bad thing. It's just it didn't
Too
feel
much
like a
corn.
heartfelt.
Too much
Yeah,
corn. This guy's corny.
it didn't feel like a heartfelt answer. And then looking back now, like I have to keep asking myself, like I have this aspirations to become a wealthy individual. And to prevent myself from going in the wrong direction, I have to constantly ask myself and be honest, why do I want to become a wealthy individual? And for me, the reason is because the journey towards becoming a wealthy individual requires you to work on yourself, do a lot of self reflection, do a lot of evaluation, a lot of goal setting to be able to get to where you want to be. It involves asking yourself, where did I go wrong with my business? Why did I lose $500,000? Why is it that we weren't as appealing to our customers? Why is it that this person did not want to get in business with me? You reflect a lot, and I think for me that's really why I want to. Is it a selfish reason? Absolutely. It makes me focus on wanting to become better. I wish I could be like those people who would say like they want to become rich because they want to help others because they see the struggles they've gone through. I wish I could say that. I can't necessarily say that. For me, it's just like the journey towards improvement is unlike anything else. It seems to me that money can be achieving money in a fair way is an indicator of how much you've had to change as an individual. I like to think that money is attracted to those who work for it fairly. People who have freedom and money tend to do well with it.
I feel like in some ways that's also the wrong question. I'm just gonna push back on this because I think one of the more this is gonna sound kind of bad. I feel like if your answer to why you want to be wealthy is why do you want this, like so you can be wealthy, if your answer is that you want to be wealthy for the sake of being wealthy, that is the sure sign that you won't be wealthy. I think primarily like if you can be so focused on one thing that you want to be good at, it could be analytics, it could be this or that, and like a great example that's not even financially related is like rock climbing. The guy that if you want to be so good at one thing, the thing that you do, I think wealth will follow you. Like, and it's not a one-to-one correlation like with those analytics people. I think what's happening is like the guy that did the rock climbing. Have you seen that uh
Which
documentary? The
one?
guy that rock climbed one of the highest mountains without any gear. Like he free climbed it. I think it's called free climb or
Yeah,
something.
free climbing. Yeah. I've seen
So
I've seen the
he
video.
he was not thinking about getting wealthy. He wanted to climb that thing. He wanted to be one of the best free climbers. And because he became one of the best free climbers, like wealth kind of came to him and he became a millionaire. And I think in the same way that a lot of people when they want to focus on one thing. And I think a great example of this, now that it's kind of late night here and I'm kind of getting hungry, is In and Out. Like, I think they weren't necessarily thinking about becoming the richest or like one of the best, being the best like franchisee or whatever. I consider them one of the best like burger places. I think the burger's really good. You got to come here to at least try them out. But what they did was they focused solely on making the best burger, like straight up, just focus on it at the price that they can sell it at.
Mm-hmm.
They're so focused on it that eventually all the customers came. See, it wasn't that they were focused on the customers to get to there. Like, they were so focused on the product itself that it just sold itself. I think similarly to how Apple initially kind of came to be, they were so focused on the experience, not necessarily the product, like the experience of the
Mm-hmm.
iPhone, that it eventually sold itself. Then they were able to kind of branch out. And so
Yeah.
there's that idea to being the best of a certain niche rather than seeking to be wealthy for the sake of being wealthy.
What you're describing, actually, there's a phenomenon for what you're describing. It's called Wilson's Law. Have you heard of Wilson's Law before?
I have never heard of this Wilson guy.
All right. So Wilson's Law basically states that if you prioritize learning and knowledge, constant learning and growing your knowledge, you will eventually start to become wealthy. Like, wealth will start to follow. And that also reminds me. I'm going to show you another picture. This is Stephen Bartlett. Do you know Stephen Bartlett?
Mhm.
He's the post for Diary of a CEO. He's the
Oh,
CEO of
that's who
multiple
he is. Okay.
companies. Yeah, and his principle, the very first chapter that he talks about, is he wants you to focus on knowledge and your skills first. First, build up your knowledge base, and then you start to build up your skills, which will eventually connect you to like-minded people, will help you build this network, will give you access to resources, and then will eventually build up your reputation. It's interesting how all of that is focused and prioritized on learning and gaining a good education, getting a good constantly being able to grow. I think that it's great to have a starting point and to see that the key to success is to really to build your skills. And I'm reminded of this when you mentioned that. So hopefully, learning from everything that you've mentioned, I focus more on
Knowledge and skills.
knowledge and skills and reading more. What's your favorite method of building on knowledge and skills?
I mean, I think it's doing the thing. I think it's doing it. I liked watching this guy named Alex Hormozy,
Mhm.
and one of the things that he says is there's no shortcut. Like, one of the shortcuts you can know is that there is no shortcuts. Meaning, just do the thing long enough, and maybe you're not the best at learning, but if you can do the thing long enough, maybe other people are working 40 hours, let's say. There's really no shortcut. Like, if you're gonna if you're a new person in a company doing an analytics or whatever, doing X, and somebody has 2 years over you, that's like 80 hours, right? Like you
Mhm.
have to do more work to be at that same level. And if you've been gifted with intelligence, maybe it'll take you less, but the work will still need to be done. And what's going to happen is there are people that grow complacent. And it's not necessarily like they could grow complacent and then they're comfortable with what they are. But if you have the ambition, you can eventually surpass those people at a shorter amount of time. Which kind of reminded me of, I guess, one of our mentors, Elder Mason, and I admired how he kind of got to where he was from an older gentleman, kind of even going back to school and eventually having the opportunities that he had, and like there's this ageism that has happened, but he was able to overcome them through sheer work and determination, and work means work. And to be honest, I think there's a lot of there's certain expectations that happen where people aren't necessarily working when they should be working.
Mhm.
Maybe there's almost like a flex that, let's say, for example, if you are working remote, that in that remote time you're able to do your laundry, for example, or maybe just relax. Yeah, or I don't know. There's so many different things that could be happening, and although you could have used that time, like I think with that level of flexibility, there also needs to be a level of accountability. And so, with that being said, you just have to work more. You just have to work and be determined to do the thing. And I'm reminded of like an old proverb, I think by somebody, Thomas something. I'm kind of forgetting his name, but the idea is like a student was asking a master, like, a master, how can I be more successful? And then the student, and then the master says, come back to me tomorrow, and come back to me tomorrow. So the next day, the student comes to the master. It's like, well, master, how could I be more successful? And then the master once more says, like, come back to me tomorrow. And then on the third day, says, like, master, like, it's been the third day. I've asked you 3 times now. Like, how can I be more successful? So then the master comes down to him, like, on this shoreline, and the master was on a boat, and the student is like, I want you to keep following, like, kind of pushing the boat farther and farther away. Initially, it was up to his knees, and then onto his hips, then up to his chest, and then the student, when the student can no longer go further, the master kind of pulls his head down in the water, and then the student's kind of like moving around, trying to grab some air. And
Let
eventually,
me guess. Let me guess how this ends.
yeah,
The student asked, like, "Why the heck did you do that?" And
mhm,
the master responds, if when you start to want it as much as you wanted air, that's when you know.
exactly. And I firmly believe in this day and age and time, and it's not a bad thing also to be complacent if you are comfortable where you are, because as a species of man, we have come a long way with
Mhm.
AC and light, just like that, with maybe computers, and entertainment everywhere, TV, weights, it's work out, whatever. It's okay if that is what you want. But if that's not what you if you're not in a position where you want to be, you can't kind of blame the universe, especially for me speaking this from the United States. There's so many more opportunities and possibilities, and there's a level of stability here where I don't necessarily have to worry about a hurricane hitting us, just like in the
Lucky
Philippines.
you.
Exactly. The only thing I have to worry about is that one volcano gonna hit, and it's probably gonna potentially destroy the state, but who knows? Uh, we're waiting
Wait,
for the
what
big one,
volcano is that?
supposedly.
What
We're wait.
volcano is that?
It's a dormant volcano, but supposedly, like, it's supposed to hit like every 100 years or something, and we're waiting
Oh
for the big
God.
one now. It's kind of late, or it might have just been an earthquake. Yeah, but the point being that, especially like even now with remote and people being able to provide value, there's just no more excuses. Um, and there are very much valid things on why maybe some certain people cannot do it, you know but as a general whole, as a general belief, we are now at this threshold that if you want to do something, you can do it, with enough effort and dedication.
Mhm. It's I think back. I think back to wanting air as much as possible, more than anything.
Yeah, so don't even
And
sleep.
yeah.
Well, actually, sorry, I just want to clarify that reminded me now of Jeff Bezos, of what he said. um in the start of Amazon, he barely slept. Is because he had to make multiple decisions, that although had many consequences, he needed to make more decisions. But comparing the early stages of Amazon to now, like most CEOs that you see at those bigger companies, they're actually they're fit, and then they're saying that they're sleeping 8 hours at least, and they're eating healthy. Is like,
Right.
what the heck? Like, how were you able to do that from the beginning? And he said he couldn't. He could, if what he's doing right now, he could not have done it in the early stages of Amazon, because now at the later stages of Amazon, he only really has to make 3 meaningful decisions, and he needs every rest, every nutrition, every preparation, working out. Like he needs to have a clarity of mind to make those 3 decisions. While
Right.
compared to the early stages of Amazon, there were 300 decisions that he had to make, that he had to stay up for, that he had to kind of know the analytics
Yeah.
to. And so there is a difference between the beginning and the later stages.
Right. It's interesting you point that out. How when I think about Elon Musk, what he says about being the CEO is the worst because all the you're filtered out to receive the worst problems that no one wants to deal with. Because like problems like people can solve, like that's already dealt with, but it gets to the CEO level, like no one else wants to solve this or no one else can solve this, and so you're kind of left with the worst problems of a company. And I think to myself, like if I really like, I'm at a crossroads. I want to be wealthy to a certain degree, and I want to be financially independent. I want to receive a certain amount of money, and and I have some really ambitious goals about finance and wealth. But at the same time, I have things that I'm not willing to give up. Like for example, some people are willing to sacrifice family time. If I have my own family, like that's something that I can't really give up. If I have to, do certain things with them, um, and if am I willing to sacrifice going to the gym and you know sleep less or even not sleep at all? That's something that right now I feel like I can't feel comfortable to do.
That's why you got to make the sacrifices now while you have no
Yeah,
family.
that's what that. That's why I have much of the liberty now. I think back to like I remember when I was married, I knew that I couldn't do this, and that because I knew that I'd have to sacrifice spending time with my wife. But now that I'm divorced and single again, I'm thinking there's a lot of things that I could focus on and do right now.
Mhm.
My family complains. My family complains that even on vacation days, I'm either studying and working or doing something else that keeps me preoccupied. My weekends are pretty much booked because I'm doing something. This vacation that we're taking in a few days is like one of the first few times that I've actually taken a vacation to actually start working on it. And they just when you're a busy person, when you're trying to aspire to that, people just don't see you as often. I've
Mhm.
been accused of being like a loner and just like doesn't really hang out with friends because of the number of times they've asked me to go out. I just had to say no, I can't.
Well, I think that's a sacrifice that kind of has to happen, and it kind of going back to Alex Hormozy. One of the things that happens is when you transition from person A to person B, you person B might not attract the same level of attention or like friendships at
Mm,
that stage. It's natural, and it's not necessarily anything to feel bad for.
right. I have a deeper appreciation for those who've had to sacrifice much because I'm now seeing what it means to sacrifice a social life and being accused of being a hermit in
So
order to build something that you really like. But yeah, it's great. All right. Well, yeah, lots of things, lots of things to think about. Any final thoughts on your end? Anything that you wanted to add?
yeah, well, like to kind of take it back to what we were speaking with the Pope. All these materialistic things. I think the reason why we kind of want to be more financially independent is to be able to kind of provide for others rather than really for ourselves, and that we can establish certain connections and relationships in this life so that we can then enjoy it to a further degree in the eternities. And like with the passing of the Pope, I think there's a level of that self-awareness that we're not we are mortal, and even God's people, they're not. I mean, he was blessed to live up to the age of 94, but there are some that even with God's blessings, we might not have that same time, and we got to prioritize. We got to make sacrifices and priorities. Know what makes you happy, and then everything. Do as much as you can to kind of achieve that, and foregoing everything else.
Right.
With that said, we need to also. Oh, sorry. I think Warren Buffett's 94. I think maybe both of them are 94. They're both kind of old.
Both of them are definitely old.
Yes. And
They're
so,
definitely at that level.
and with Warren Buffett, invest the time. And part of, I think a great line in terms of an investment, in Alexander Hamilton, the musical, is like, a legacy. What is a legacy? A legacy is planting a tree that you don't get to see. And so,
Oh,
with that said, it's like an investment, and sometimes these investments we may not see in our current lifestyle, in our current life, but once again, in the eternities, we can hopefully see that we have been a net positive in the world.
right. My final words are just simply going to be like, it's interesting. From this conversation, I've learned to be an open book, to be an open-minded person, and to look at things through the perspective of other people. When you're an open mind, it's easier to accept that maybe both of you are right. It just so happens that it's just in different contexts. And both of us have very different views on some things, but
I like to think of it as, or you could both be wrong.
other people are gonna be both of them are right. You and I were just both constantly wrong about things. But yeah, I'm grateful for it. It's life is easier when you live with an open mind, and I aspire to be someone to be as open minded as some of my mentors. But yeah, this has been great. We're grateful for everyone who's joined us, and yeah, till next time.
Yeah, take care.